In this video we're going to go ahead and do some drywall installation, and I'm still working in the room from the previous videos. This time we're going to hang sheetrock here in the closet. I'll get my phone out of the way. I'm using my phone for light, and there's a couple of different things we're going to have to take in consideration. Number one is that electric box there in the ceiling, and also this plumbing pipe, this drain that comes down from the ceiling, and we're going to have to cut around that obstruction as well. But first we're going to cut the sheetrock into the correct size. Here I've got my panel. This is 3/8 inch drywall. I like using 3/8 for ceilings because it is fairly sturdy. Obviously not as sturdy as 1/2 inch or even definitely not as sturdy as 5/8, but it's good enough for ceilings. Ceilings generally don't take a pounding like walls. So structurally it's good enough. You can even use 1/4 inch in a ceiling, in my opinion. The reason that I use 3/8 is that it's not as stout as 1/2 inch, but it's not as heavy as 1/2 inch either, so you're not holding up as much weight. The panel's already cut to width. Now we need to cut the length. And so what I did is I measured the length of the closet there, and I've already struck my line. The length by tape is 44.5. I marked my line at 44.25, giving me a little bit of play on each side. I think I've complained enough about the person that I hired to do the initial construction in here, and nothing is really square in that closet. So I need a little bit of room for fudge factor and out of square corners. So I cut it 1/4 inch short, or I marked it 1/4 inch short, and I'm going to cut it on this line. Now, whenever doing sheetrock, I always start with a clean blade. You know, these blades, they can be flipped around, but they go dull quick, and I'd rather work with a sharp knife than a dull knife any day. Actually, that's the most dangerous knife in the world, is a dull knife, because of the force you have to use to cut with it, and it's easy to slip, but it's going to be sharp enough to catch you. So we're just going to come across here. We're going to score this line. I'm not quite on it, but it's close enough. Just remember that because I'm doing the ceiling first, that any gaps I have will be covered on any gaps I have on the edges will be covered by the 1/2 inch sheetrock that I'm going to hang on the walls. So I've scored my line, not very deep, and just give it a little pop, and it folds right over. And then you got this backing paper on the back here. You can see the seam that you have to deal with. You don't want to tear it, but you want to cut it, and it's easy to cut. Just take your knife and insert it into the hinge of the cut, or the hinge that you formed with that paper, and just get it in there, and then work your knife along. Till you cut all the way through. Whoops. Sorry about that. So I have a fairly straight cut. This isn't finished cabinetry by any means. I have a little bulge here, and what I can do is I can take that cheese grater that I showed you, or that drywall rasp in a previous video, and I can form this down, and that's what I'll use as well if I go to fit this in and find that, because I got an out of square corner inside there, my sheetrock's got to come down a little bit more in one spot or another. If it's excessive, then I'll use the knife and cut it, but in this particular case, it's probably just going to be a matter of millimeters for you metric folks, or you know, 1/8 of an inch in one direction or another. So I'll just use the drywall rasp. So the next thing we got to do is we're going to get my phone back out so I got some light in there. Is we're going to get some measurements for those boxes, or for that ceiling box, which is where the light's going to go, and also I have to cut around where that pipe is. Not the best design. I wouldn't have run the pipe like that. I ran a lot closer to the wall, so I could have cased it inside the wall, but it is what it is. I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to roll with it. So I'll get my measurements and then I'll put them on the board, and we'll go from there. Okay, now I've laid out the position of my holes that I need to cut in this sheetrock in order for it to fit in that ceiling. What I like to do is, as you can see, I've marked the top. I think you can see it with the front. So that is the edge that's going to go along the front of the closet. That way I don't get all discombobulated. So when I was getting ready to, or when I in preparations for cutting that ceiling box hole, I measured from the left side of the closet to the approximate center of that ceiling box, 24 3/4. And I put these on there, that way you can see where I'm coming up with these measurements. Then I measured from the back of the closet, the back edge where this ceiling is going to go in, to the center of the ceiling box going this way, and I came up with 17 3/4. Now, when I measured for this line, all I did is I just measured two 24 3/4 inch distances. Struck a line there, came down here, measured 24 3/4, made a mark there, and then I used my level to draw that line in, and the same thing for all the rest of these lines. So there's my center, or near center, for that ceiling box. And I don't know if it's out wide enough, but as you can see, it's not falling directly in the center of that panel like it should in a perfect world. But I don't feel like pulling the nails and repositioning that box, so I'm just going to go with it. It's not too terrible bad, but it is off center. And then I did the same thing for that pipe that's coming down out of the ceiling there, down at the bottom. I measured from the left of the left wall of the closet, and I struck a couple marks at 19 3/4, which is the center of that 1.5 inch pipe, that drain pipe, and made 2 marks and struck a line. Then I measured from the back wall to the center of the pipe coming out from the wall, and it was 1.5 inches. Again, struck 2 lines at 1.5 inches, and then used my level to draw a straight line. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut that ceiling box hole. Let me get up a little bit closer here. And I mean, there's several ways. If you've got an extra ceiling box, you can lay it on there, draw the outline of the box on that, and then use your jab saw to cut the hole out. I'm going to do it a little bit different way, and I'm going to use a hole saw. This happens to be a 4-inch hole saw, which is actually a little bit too small, but it's going to give me the rough hole, and then I can use my my jab saw to finish taking it out probably about another 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch all the way around. It doesn't have to be exact, because most lights, you've got a bonnet at the top that actually fixes the light to the box and provides a place for wiring. So if I cut this hole a little bit too big, it's going to be okay, because the bonnet of the light, the part that fits up against the ceiling, is going to cover that excessive hole, that if the hole's too big. I think this is going to work. This one, as you can see, the teeth are pretty worn down, but it doesn't have to be terrible sharp to cut through this sheetrock. So what I'm going to do is put my drill bit on the center of that mark there, and then put a little pressure on it so the drill bit can start. Wow, no, it's not going to work. I was hoping that I could find some use for this, because it's shot otherwise. But what I can use it for is to give myself a hole there, or not a hole, but a line that I know that I can use that as a guide for cutting with the jab saw. So let me grab my jab saw. Hopefully I can find it. And I guess it's not too bad anyway, because I knew I was going to have to cut this hole bigger anyhow. So what I'll do is I'll come about a 1/4 inch out from that line, that circle I marked, work my saw in there. And you want to be careful with the jab saw, especially with the panel sitting like this. You don't want to sit there and try to jab it, because then you may break this panel. So I just worked it in. Now I'm going to go like I said, about a 1/4 inch or so. Well, got a little bit off there. That's all right. And there's my hole. It's rough, but like I said, you won't see it once that permanent light's installed in there. So what I'm going to do is cut this one next, and then we'll test fit it. Okay, so I cut that hole, and in this particular case I had a hole saw to do it, a good one. In fact, it's brand new. I know from experience that normally drains like that are 1.5 inch diameter. So I cut it excessive, that way I've got fudge factor and I'm not fighting it trying to get it around that pipe when I'm installing it. And what I can do is, after it's installed, I can dress it up. I can fill the excessive hole with mud and form it, sand it down, and so it'll look like you just cut it perfectly and was able to fit it right in. So now what I have to do is I have to take that outside edge off right here, because there's no way I can get that around the pipe. So basically what I got to do is I've got to notch it. And by the way, the hole saw I used for this was 2.5 inch. So what I'm going to do, carefully, maybe I'll come in from this side, because now I've got a weak spot here. Let me go ahead and do it like this. Make sure it's still in frame. Okay. So I'm going to come in, again, it doesn't have to be exact. And just, instead of using a push-pull cut, I'll just use a pull to keep from overstressing this board. Because now that I've got holes in it, those are weak spots in the integrity of the panel itself. So, not pretty, but that should fit. So the next thing to do is to test fit that panel to see if we need to make any adjustments on either the edges or the holes themselves. Alright, I got the ceiling installed, and I want to tell on myself. I want to tattle on myself. I really muffed that hole up right there. I was about 1 inch off. And I'm not sure why. Well, I mean, I'm sure why. I measured it wrong. That's where the old adage to measure twice and cut once comes in. So I was too far out in this direction here. So I had to cut that hole back. And the light fixture base almost covers it, but I'm not going to use that light anyway. But I am going to have to address that. I'll probably cut it square, put a backing board on it, and then cut a small piece of 3/8 inch drywall and fit it up in there, and then mud it and make it look good. I'm not going to leave it like that. But you could, you know, if you were going to use a wide base ceiling fixture, you know, it'd cover that, but that's not ideally what you want. So there you go. I told on myself. The pipe hole came out really well. That was right on. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that before putting these ceiling panels on, what you want to do is where your floor joist runs underneath that panel. Okay, the floor joist runs this way and runs across. I made a mark to let me know where my floor joist was. That pencil mark right there. And I did the same thing on the other side. Right there, made a mark. So I knew where to screw. Even though I'm using short screws, you know, we talked about wiring channels, and I knew that my screw wasn't long enough to actually penetrate into the wiring channel and hit the wiring. I put those nail guards on, and right there you can see a hole where I tried to run a screw, and I had a nail guard there. So it wouldn't let me run that screw up in there, so I just moved it back and put my screw there. One of the things I want to talk about with these drywall screws is that you don't want to go too deep. You basically just want to get the screw tight against the sheetrock and then ease it in, and just so that it's countersunk below the level of the surface of the sheetrock. So I don't know if I can get this tripod in here. Basically, you want to run that screw in, and you want to feel with your finger a little divot. If the screw is exactly flush against the surface of the sheetrock, then when you mud, you're going to see that screw. even though these screws are coated, they do have the potential to rust, and they could rust into your, once you put that mud on there, so you'd have an orange spot, which isn't a fantastically big deal. But yeah, you wanna feel a divot in there on that surface of that sheetrock. And the same thing on this one here. You know, you want to feel a little divot where you can feel that that screw is definitely down beneath the surface of the sheetrock. On the flip side of that, you don't want to go too far. You can run these screws too far, and what it does is it weakens, excuse me, hitting puberty evidently. It weakens underneath where that screw is at, and the weight of the panel can actually pull and pull away from that screw, and your panel will drop. So that's something you want to be aware of. A lot of screw guns have clutches on them. The screw gun I'm using here is a Milwaukee, and it has an adjustable clutch on it right here, and it's numbered. Turn it counterclockwise all the way, you get to the drill setting, which is no clutch. It's not gonna stop it at all. It's just gonna keep drilling. And then you start coming down clockwise to lower numbers, and you get the clutch feature of these screw guns. So when you're running a screw in, once it hits a certain tension, it'll stop screwing. And you'll hear that rattle, and that's the clutch giving way. And of course, the higher you go, the more effort you got to put on it to hold it. And that works good for drywall. I found that even on the lowest setting with the 3/8 inch drywall, I still have to self-monitor. It's not going to clutch and stop driving that screw in. It doesn't have enough tension. The 1/2 inch sheetrock, I find it works better. It actually gives you that clutching action. And what you do is you run a screw at the lowest setting, and then you run it until it clutches. If it didn't go deep enough, then you go ahead and turn your clutch up a little bit, run the screw until it clutches. You might run through on a screw, but chances are you'll find by starting low and working your way up, you'll find the point where it's set just right. It countersinks the screw, but then the tension that the screw gives back forces this into a clutch, and then you just go on with it. Now sometimes the sheetrock has different densities, and one area will be denser than the other, so it might prematurely clutch where all the rest of the screws were running fine, or it may not clutch in time. You might hit a soft spot or an air pocket in the sheetrock, and you'll drive the screw through, and that's okay. Just go a few inches away and run another screw. They make screw guns that are specifically for sheetrock work, and you know, they're nice. They've got a belt feed or a cartridge feed screw, kind of like a gun magazine, you know, that holds bullets, and it automatically feeds you the next screw. However, I find that, you know, those screw setups are expensive to buy because they come pre-manufactured, and so I just run with a normal everyday, what you would say an everyday screw gun is. So that's it for this part of it. Next we're going to talk about installing the walls, and that's going to be pretty straightforward. There's a couple different ways that you can put walls in. You can put them in horizontal. In other words, if you had a, say for example, a 4x8 sheet of drywall. Let me get out to a wall here. This wall yeah, I can tell just by the mud joints that the panels were put in vertically. And pretty much that's the way you want to go. And the reason for it is because we talked about the finished edges on the 8-foot sides of your panel where they're beveled in, and it provides a nice nesting spot. Let me find my pencil. And of course, I'm not going to find a pencil. Just had it. Let me pause this so I can find my damn pencil. Okay, found my pencil. Let me move this up closer. So these panels were run vertically. In other words, the 8-foot width or length went this way, and then 4 feet between the two joint lines here. And realistically, that's the way that you really want to do it. That way you avoid butt joints. And when talking about how these panels are finished on the factory edges, the 8-foot sides, you got the, and I'm terrible at drawing, you got the two panels that are going to fit up next to each other, and this is the bottom of the panel. Then you got your edge like this, and then they come manufactured with a bevel on each side of the panel.